Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'll just give folks another couple of moments to log on. All right, folks, welcome. My name is Gianna. I'm one of the reference librarians here at the Chelmsford Public Library. And thank you all so much for joining us for tonight's Art on Thursday's Kehinde Wiley Color and Splendor. Kehinde Wiley's portrait of President Obama cemented his status in the contemporary art world as an artist that mixes grand manner portraiture traditions, intricate patterns and designs in a vibrant technicolor palette. His paintings, which most often depict contemporary African American subjects, examine visual codes for power and challenge expectations. This program explores the artist's life and provides an overview of his works and inspiration. And to present our presenter, we have Jane O'Neill joining us. She holds a master's in art history from Boston University and a master's in education from Harvard University Graduate School of Education. She's a New Hampshire native and has worked at some of the state's most esteemed cultural institutions, including the League of New Hampshire Craftsmen, where she served as executive director, and the Currier Museum of Art, where she held the role of senior educator. Jane founded the Currier's Alzheimer's Cafe and led the tour program for the museum and the Frank Lloyd Wright-designed Zimmerman House. She has taught art history at the college level for more than a decade, most recently at the New Hampshire Institute of Art. And without further ado, let me pass it over to Jane.
Thank you so much, Gianna. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Kehinde Wiley on this leap day that we have. We've got like a bonus day, and it feels like a little gift. And let me tell you, Kehinde Wiley's work is such a gift to us. So, color and splendor is our theme today. You will not be disappointed. Kehinde Wiley delivers in every way. Now, as the program summary sort of alluded to, Kehinde Wiley is really at the top of his game right now. He's been voted by Time Magazine to be one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. And so he has this expansive reach in terms of people who are interested in looking at his artwork. So we'll see sort of how he arrived at this particular incredible moment in his life and career. So let's dive right in. We'll be getting back to this wonderful man on the screen here in just a little bit. Here is our program overview for tonight, and here is our first look at the artist Kehinde Wiley. We'll start off looking at his early life, the template that sort of prepares him, sets him up for this kind of success. And then we'll examine his artistic breakthrough and how he finds the signature style that he is so well known for. And he's really a gift to the art history gods in so many ways because he creates these wonderful images that are referential to the past, to the field of art history itself. So we'll think about art history, race, and power, and how he offers up these visual problems that we get to kind of decode together. And then we'll turn our attention to the problem of what do you do if you've established a career on painting people who are without power, and then you're assigned to paint the most powerful man in the world, the presidential portrait, of course, and then wrap up with just a quick peek at some of his more recent work, just to kind of round things out for us. We will well, we won't get a chance to see all of his work tonight. He's still a very young man, but he has produced an incredible body of painting. So tonight is really like a great primer, I think, on Kehinde Wiley. Okay, so let's dive right into his early life here. Don't you just love childhood pictures? I really do. So Kehinde Wiley was born in 1977, so he's still in his mid 40s today, and he grew up in South Central LA. He is the younger brother in a set of twins. So we can see him and his brother here with his mother. And actually his name, Kehinde, is a name that his mother selected for him, which literally means the second born twin. I think that is in that's a tradition in his father's native country, which was Nigeria. His parents met while his father was studying architecture at UCLA. His mother was studying linguistics there. And shortly after she gave birth to Kehinde and his brother, his father returned to Nigeria and was not really involved with the family from that point forward. So his mother was actually a single mother to 6 children, and we can imagine just how well, just how poor he grew up, to be frank. And so she kind of made ends meet by having what he described as almost like a Sanford and Son thrift shop out or sort of inside their house and on the little patch of grass out in front of their house. So he was kind of surrounded by this stuff. And he was a precocious young boy. Apparently, by the age of 10, he had taught himself to cook, or he had learned to cook by watching Julia Child's show on TV. And so he took over all of the household cooking for this big family by the age of 10. And his mother realized that like she needed to keep this boy engaged with creative endeavors. Certainly, we all have associations with just how tough South Central Los Angeles was, particularly in the late 80s, the early 90s. And so she was looking for ways to keep her sons occupied. So he sort of started showing this interest in art by sketching the things in this thrift shop that she was running. And so she began to take her children to museums, including, and importantly for our purposes tonight, the Huntington Library in San Marino, California. Here's another great family portrait. I'm pretty sure out of the twins here, this is Kehinde. This is the star of our show tonight. And this is the inside of the Huntington Library and Museums. They are renowned for their collection of 18th century portraiture. And this was a gallery that really just galvanized young Kehinde Wiley. He loved these portraits, these grand matter portraits, these testaments to the power and the status of the people being painted here. Of course, he also felt a little bit on the outside because he was one of the few Black faces inside this museum, but really drawn to the technical elements of these paintings as well. Now, he was so interested and I would say so artistically inclined at such a young age that his mother also ensured that he and his brother traveled to St. Petersburg, Russia. By the age of 12, they were involved in a short-term exchange program for the arts. So while he was there, he got to visit the expansive Hermitage Museum, which we see pictured here. It's like as big as the Louvre. So inside, he's seeing even more grand manner portraiture. These are just, I mean, the Hermitage goes on and on forever and ever, but these are the kinds of portraits that he might have seen while he was there. These official state portraits with stately poses, over the top clothes, equestrian portraits like this. And these are the kinds of imagery that would come to influence his career later on in life. So he returns to South Central LA and he's involved in various art programs. He goes to a high school for the arts specifically. And this mural that he created as a teenager was actually very celebrated, and it was reproduced and included, put on, or at least inside, about 2,000 buses in LA. So here he is standing alongside it, looking very, very pleased, of course. What an achievement for a young artist. And I kind of love this picture because it shows, you know, he's a young man of his time. Here he shows a young mother holding up a baby to this beam of light here, and it says, "It takes a whole village to raise a child." So he's like internalizing all these influences from the mid 1990s, everything from The Lion King to Hillary Rodham Clinton's book about it takes a village. Now, interestingly, this is one of the only times we're going to see him treat the subject of motherhood. He's not as interested in female subjects or in children in his paintings, but I think it's also a nod to his own mother and a recognition of her great encouragement in terms of his participation in the arts. So from high school, he goes on to study at the San Francisco Institute of Arts. Here's just a great photo of him as a young college student. From there, he heads to New Haven, Connecticut. He's got a scholarship to get an MFA at Yale University. Now, one of his great models, one of his great inspirations in terms of his artistic career and trajectory was actually Connecticut-based artist named Barclay Hendricks. And Hendricks, who's very collectible now, I know the Obamas have collected some of his work. Hendricks really made made a splash, I would say, in the 1970s and 1980s by doing Black figurative paintings like the two that I have on the screen here. And it's usually these kind of stylish subjects who are set against a monochromatic background. But they're really striking. They're quite engaging images, and of course they're realistic. Uh, Kehinde Wiley once said, whatever he was doing, he had Barclay Hendricks in the back of his mind. So we'll keep that in our minds as well. So goes to Yale. He's like poised for great success. Well, then he gets another incredible opportunity. He gets a 1-year artist in residency opportunity in New York City at the Studio Museum of Harlem. So here he is in New York City. What a year to be there. It was the year 2001. That's probably not the best year to be living in New York City, but this was an incredible experience for him. Now, in my research, I couldn't determine when exactly Kehinde Wiley came out of the closet, but by this point, he is most certainly living his life as an openly gay man. So some of the work that he's doing while he's doing this artist in residency really come to inform and shape where he goes and how he arrives at this signature style that he's best known for today. So I just wanted to share with you some of this early work. This is a video project that he did in 2001 called Smile, where he cast young African-American men as models, found most of them just on the sidewalk off the streets of New York City. And he invites them to participate in this project where he simply trains a camera on a subject over the course of about 3 minutes or so. And he encourages these men to just smile for the camera. And you can try doing it at home right now. Just hold a smile for as long as you possibly can. And initially it might feel normal or natural, but of course, after 3 minutes, it can kind of turn into a grimace or something a little bit unnatural or forced. And of course, with a project like this, he is thinking about the way young African American men have to present themselves to the world, but also in the way that they are perceived by the rest of the world. And certainly that's a dynamic that he is very much a part of too. And he talks so much about his artwork sort of being a reflection of his experience, of his desire to see more Black and brown bodies and faces in the history of art. From this point on, his mentor at the Studio Museum in Harlem said, I can't wait to see where you go from here. So he's exploring some big ideas and also kind of pulling threads, this kind of loose inspiration from artists like Andy Warhol and Basquiat here. So where does he go? Well, let's head there ourselves to examine his breakthrough and his arrival at his signature style. Now, there is a certain amount of randomness and chance involved in Kehinde Wiley's process. And the same can be true when it comes to his kind of discovery of this signature style, because he was walking down the street one day in New York City and this piece of paper kind of floats by him. He happens to grab it. He opens it up and it's this sheet of paper. It's a young man's mugshot. And as he's looking at it, he's just he rolling over in his brain this tradition in Western art to exalt and show the status of white subjects versus this portraiture tradition, which does exactly the opposite. It sort of strips away the dignity, any sort of um, external cues of wealth, of status, of respect, and even the positioning. A straight frontal portrait like this one is just the exact opposite of what he has seen in the canon of Western art. So he's drawn to this image. He paints this image, and we can see by this time in his career, his ability to paint a very realistic portrait is like ever evolving, and it's really sort of arrived by this point. And he's continuing to think, what can I do to sort of point to this disparity that exists between these traditions in art history and really the way young Black men are represented in mass media and in art today. So he starts a series that he calls the Conspicuous Fraud series. And this is all still while he's doing his artist in residency. This is a picture that he called Eminence from 2001. And so we can see him exploring these notions of okay, well, how do I convey status, the status of this young Black man here? I can put him in a business suit. He looks important. I can even sort of cast him as though we're looking up at him. That always exalts your subjects, right? And he's kind of looking down at us. But Wiley also wants to explore the Blackness of this figure too. So in this case, he makes this figure's hair just continue to grow and expand and curl and wrap around him, sort of, or at least overlap him here um, in these incredible kind of curly cues in a way that the figure almost doesn't even seem to acknowledge in this picture. And of course, we're going to see almost like a natural evolution from this picture going forward. So he finishes up his artist in residency, and within the space of a few years, he has a small exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. What an opportunity for an artist still in his 20s to be exhibiting at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. So this is an installation picture from that show over on the left. And on the right, we have a detail of that image that's in the middle there. Now you can see a series of pictures here that all have this arched top to them. So with this series, he's kind of thinking very directly of images of saints and the divine, going back to the Italian Renaissance. And the way that they often were posed, the kind of attributes they held to designate their divinity. So he's taking those poses, those traditions, but he's casting those divine figures once again as young Black men. And in the detail that we have over here, we can see that they're just wearing casual clothing too. A lot of them are wearing sports jerseys. So they really look of the present day. There's no mistaking that they are of our time, but they're inserted into this tradition. Interestingly, and we'll see that throughout his career, Kehinde Wiley is really interested in this push and pull, this interplay between the figure and the decorative background. So in this case, we have these golden fleur-de-lis, and they kind of overlap the figure, but also go behind the figure. Notice too that his legs are almost like dissolving into the background of this picture here. The pink is kind of interesting. I think in this series, he is still kind of exploring this push-pull between exploring not just Black masculinity, but also to a certain extent his identity, his own identity as a gay man. So there's some push-pull there about masculinity and gender identity, I think, in some of these images. Here's just another view of this same gallery, and we can see at the back wall there are these two other pictures that have this bright or saturated orange color, and then this remarkable halo effect from a very vivid yellow that's behind the heads of these figures. We can see one of them in detail over here on the right. Once again, it's a subject wearing a sports jersey, and I love how he kind of captures the shine of that sports jersey. His legs seem to dissolve into the painting, but we can still see the structure of them there. There's, the idea that the jersey's kind of coming down over his shoulder too as well, and he's gesticulating as though he's from a painting from the Renaissance. So he seems to be coached in kind of striking a pose that you might not necessarily see a figure like this striking if you were to see them in everyday life. So we see a beautiful background here. There's this delicate garland, these swags, these curling volutes here. And once again, they go behind the figure and sort of overlap the figure in really interesting ways. So one last element from this installation that I wanted to share with you is the ceiling. And Wiley did a 20-foot long painting, a ceiling painting that is in the style of of like Rococo ceiling paintings. Think of the artist Tiepolo in particular, who could paint a ceiling and make it look as though the ceiling has dissolved and we are looking straight up into the sky and watching the gods and goddesses kind of float around and get into trouble. Wiley here has decided to paint breakdancers. So he's taken them off the ground and thrown them up into the sky and exalted them that way. And of course, they're striking all of these unusual poses, and we're seeing them from strange angles as well, just as you would a Tiepolo ceiling over here. They have their own delicate tracery work that kind of suggests their own halos and heavenly status. They are kind of flanked by all of these little rose petals, and they are firmly set in modern day because we even see a little airplane up here in the sky. But Wiley always pays great attention to the logos, the symbols, the brand names that his subjects are wearing. These are the details that are important to them, and he wants to capture them in his art as well. Interestingly, this ceiling painting that he did when he was just in his mid-20s really has recently been sort of expanded upon and turned into a stained glass installation, a permanent installation at Penn Station in New York City. Wiley said, "I wanted to create at the intersection of trade, commerce, and transportation in the capital of the world's economy, something that sits as a testament to Black possibility." So the next time you move through New York City, make sure you look up at these incredible breakdancers. So we are just about at Kehinde Wiley, arriving at his signature style. And there's a little bit of hustle involved in this, a little bit of chance, going back to, picking up a random mugshot off of the street one day. So what he does always kind of starts off on the street. And these days he can go to streets in any city and any town all over the globe. But he started off in New York City and then later in other US cities. And he would just approach people that he thought would serve as good models. And he kind of had to have a good pickup line for them. He would say things like, "I'm an artist and you're a work of art," and try to convince them to pose for him. These days, again, that's a much easier ask because he can just, point to books about him or President Obama's portrait, and people ask if they can pay him to paint their portraits. But initially, there's a fair amount of skepticism. But once they agree, Kehinde Wiley would bring them back to his studio and show these models a collection of his art history books and invite these models to choose a painting that they would like to be styled as. And it's really not the styling, it's a painting that they would like to adopt the pose of. So take, for example, this picture here. This is a great example of the kind of picture that his models might choose. It's a pose with a great deal of confidence, but everything else you strip away after that. We don't need, well, we certainly don't need the collar, the ruff, or anything like that. We don't need the references to this fancy garden. Instead, Wiley interprets his subject in a more modern way. And so here we have his reinterpretation of this Franz Hals painting. This work was done in 2006. It's at the Virginia Museum of Art. So we've got a couple of big differences between the source material and Wiley's interpretation. Obviously, the first one is the difference of race. Wiley is recognizing and trying to sort of remedy the fact that in the canon of art history, there are not Black faces in poses like this. So he's inserting Black figures into this tradition in really interesting ways. Beyond that, we also have this issue of clothing, right? That he's not wearing the hat, he's not wearing this elaborate outfit that we see over here with the lace and the stockings. Instead, his figure over on the right is wearing sort of like his best casual outfit. It's like a Sean John leisure suit. It's Timberland boots. It's an outfit that he is proud to kind of strut his stuff in the same way that this figure is wearing an outfit that he is very proud to strut his stuff in. And then we have this notion of the difference in the background. The background in the source image here is is filled with details that are meant to call attention to the relative power of the figure who is being painted here. Expansive gardens that go off into the distance, a little portico here, the red drapery, all of that goes away. And instead of just doing a monochromatic background like his ideals, like Barclay Hendricks, the artist that he kind of idealized. Wiley often chooses a flat color, but then overlays it with a beautiful decorative pattern. Sometimes those patterns are like floral motifs. Sometimes they look like they are gorgeous wallpaper from inside a European palace. Sometimes they look like a really gorgeous rug or something like that. But they're always decorative and usually have some sort of vegetal element to them. And they almost always, I would say probably always, slightly overlap the figure as well. So art historians generally refer to this as a new field of power. This young man that he's painted probably doesn't have an expansive estate to refer to in his portrait, but instead he is in this gorgeous setting, a setting that pushes him very close to us, the viewer, and he holds our attention. So we can sort of see him as the natural progression coming out of Wiley exploring these Renaissance traditions here, where he's kind of asking his subjects to adopt specific poses. Now he's letting his subjects find poses that they feel confident in. And so we see, I don't know, there's this kind of resonance with the image on the right that just really works in a wonderful way. We also see him exploring those same ideas that he had going back to 2001, where he's thinking about how can I best exalt young Black men. And so he's abandoned the business suit. You don't have to dress up in any way that doesn't feel authentically them, but he's found other ways to show power and confidence in his subjects. And then finally, we can go all the way back to that first project that he did, where he was asking his subjects to smile, and those smiles turned into grimaces. Those were unsustainable facial expressions, right? But he was essentially exploring this relationship between the way Black men presented themselves and the way they were perceived. And he is still very much exploring that in a portrait like we see over here on the right. And I would say he's exploring it in maybe even a more successful way. So a picture like this holds the wall. These tend to be grand in scale, usually about 7.5 feet tall, and the color is so vivid and the pose is so striking that people tend to stop in front of these paintings and really take them in. There's also the technical element, the way that they're painted, the realism there, they're beautiful. So Kehinde Wiley has kind of found his signature style at this point. And so we start to see the appeal of these images and the broader appeal beyond just that they're beautifully painted, that they're presenting something that we don't often see in the history of art, but the fact that they're referential, they're a remix, they're a mashup, essentially, they are a sequel. And we all know that we as a society just love that. That's why they just keep making movies that are sequels and not original content. That we as a society in like present day America, we just love to see things that already relate in some ways to something that we're familiar with. Now, that's what we do. We gravitate naturally towards something that's familiar. His approach, his idea, his breakthrough signature style here is also an art historian's dream. Because if you've ever taken an art history class, no matter how old you are, you probably remember that at the back of that dark room, there were two slide carousels. And going back more than 100 years now at this point, there was one art historian who initiated this practice, this idea that when you study art, it is two pictures side by side. You don't study just one, you go from one to the other. It's the compare and contrast. And that is exactly what Wiley's pictures allow us to do. They allow us to do the back and the forth. And we can see sort of what he's kept, what he's abandoned. Obviously the cane, the swagger, but now his subject has his chin lifted. His subject also has great boots, so we can do that wonderful back and forth. Now, Wiley once said, it doesn't matter what the source material is for his pictures. He said, it can be total crap. As long as it's a great pose, he said, nobody's going to be looking at the source. And to a certain degree, he's right, because the image that he's created here of this young man with this incredible confidence, it's just so striking. And I would say that it is filling this void that he recognized as needing to be remedied. We can see with these figures in the museum gallery who are striking that same similar pose that he's like fulfilling a need that I don't think that the museum world fully understood even existed. And I'll just share briefly in an art museum that I've worked at in the past, when we would run tour programs, school tours in particular, there were Black and brown kids from schools that would come, and we would take them into, galleries of European art that were all paintings of white faces. And I'll never forget, there was this one little girl one day who just kept pulling me over to all of the bronze sculptures, because to her, those were brown people and they looked like her. And we all gravitate towards things that look like us. That's just human nature to a certain degree, isn't it? So some of the criticism that goes along with this is that it's an easy it's an easy update essentially to a museum collection to add a work like this. So there was an April Fool's Day article in the online art journal Hyperallergic where they said 100% rich and white museum staff announced they have successfully combated racism. The first line of that article says, citing the purchase of a single Kehinde Wiley painting, the entirely white staff of a local museum congratulated themselves on solving racism this week. Racism free, we swear. And there are certainly museums that have this approach. I don't think they go into it thinking we're solving racism, but certainly they're addressing it, and Wiley provides this kind of easy opportunity for them to do that. So at the Huntington Library, where Wiley used to go as a child, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of this very famous painting by the British artist Gainsborough, his painting called The Little Blue Boy, the 100th anniversary of its arrival in America, they commissioned Kehinde Wiley to create a portrait in response to it. Now, this was the museum that Wiley kind of grew up attending, and this was an exciting opportunity for him, because the little blue boy was an image that he gravitated towards as well as a child, because it was a picture of a kid at the very least. But it's an image that was kind of famous even before it came to the United States. It was painted in the 1770s. There were all these debates about warm and cool colors with this picture, but people just loved this little boy with his loose curls in the back, this fancy silk outfit that he's got on, the blue bows on his shoes, the plumed hat in his hand, that look of confidence with the hand on the hip here. So Wiley gives us this reinterpretation or an alternative interpretation with his portrait of a gentleman that we see over here on the right, a young man who looks sort of dressed down in comparison, but with his own splendid outfit here. He's wearing this great tie-dye t-shirt. I think these are denim shorts and sneakers here. He's also got a hat in his hand. Instead of those loose curls, he's got the bleached dreadlocks and a very similar pose where he's looking out at us from, with the hand on the hip. Wiley has included all of this kind of pink and blue here in this decorative foliage, and the nod to the orange in the shirt as well, with this beautiful flower here. It almost looks like a nasturtium or something like that. So the Huntington acquires this work and they hang it in that same gallery of 18th century portraiture where the little blue boy is hung, and also where all of these other paintings that Wiley examined as a child visiting that same museum. In fact, the little blue boy is essentially hung where we are standing here. And if we move in a little bit closer, we can see that Wiley's painting also has this elaborate decorative frame to it, but instead of it being gilt, instead of it being gold, it's painted black. And Wiley said, I'm trying to allow for even the presentation of the painting to take on the nature of its meaning. So, what does that mean? That means that the picture is saying, I'm here, I'm important, but I'm different. So take it all in. So we're going to turn our attention now to just a few more images, really incredible images, most of them from fairly early on in Wiley's career, that explore this dynamic between art history, race, and power. These are really fun images to look at. The first of them is his painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps from 2005. Maybe you've seen this in person at the Brooklyn Museum of Art. You never forget it after you see it. So once again, Wiley's thinking about looking at the art historical canon and thinking about taking Black and brown men in particular. He does paint women later on, but he starts off with men and inserting them into this canon as contemporary individuals. So he is in this painting referring to a famous work by the French artist Jacques-Louis David of actual Napoleon crossing the Alps here. And he's given his contemporary subject this same positioning, this same pose of power, of reining in a horse with just one hand, raising his other hand above his head in like a commanding general, just like Napoleon over here. But instead of the Alps in the background, we have this kind of blood red field of color with this gorgeous damask patterning on it, and some of it does overlap the subject just a little bit, so it kind of flattens out the picture that way. We can see it over here, especially with it coming over the edge of that yellow cape. And it's worth noting too that of course Napoleon is wearing a military uniform, and our subject over here, whose name is Williams, Wiley added his name to all of these carved in names of generals that have led their armies over the Alps. And Williams here is wearing camouflage fatigue. So it's the sort of thing that a soldier might be wearing, but we also just know that this is like a popular style for somebody at the time. It's just contemporary casual clothing, especially for young Black men. He's also wearing the Timberland boots. So there's this wonderful sense of confidence and directness in the gaze, but it's certainly an unexpected positioning here. Excuse me while I take a little sip. There's little wonderful details that I love here. David signed his name in the harness of the horse. Wiley did the same over here. And then a strange detail, Wiley has actually painted sperm throughout the background of this picture and even on the edges of the custom frame here. So the way this is oftentimes interpreted by art historians is that he is very much interested in Black male virility. And what a better way to signify that than actual sperm in the picture. Now, moving quickly along, because we only have so much time, I wanted to show you another Napoleon inspired picture. The original image is by the artist Ang. It is a blockbuster in terms of its realism, the sense of rational order in this picture, the sense of sort of like unmitigated power with Napoleon wearing these golden laurel leaves, holding the scepter, draped in this red velvet robe that's lined with ermine. It's an unbelievable knockout original painting, and Wiley reinterprets it with the rapper and actor Ice-T in that almost that same position there. But again, the chin is a little bit higher. There's a little bit more swagger to a picture like this. And we can see the artist and Wiley here together in front of the picture. I don't know who owns it now, but I do know that if I was Ice-T, I would certainly be buying that picture. Now, one other image that was created right around the same time, Wiley was actually commissioned to do a series of paintings, of portraits, for a VH1 awards show. So he also painted a portrait of the rapper and actor LL Cool J, James Todd Smith. And this is a portrait that is now at the National Portrait Gallery in DC. And if you've ever seen it in person, it's another one of these paintings that just you can't take your eyes off of it. Part of it is this like lime green that we have in this picture, this very vivid contrast between the green and this red orange. It just draws your eye in. But it's also this magnificent picture of like supreme confidence here. Now, his subject, LL Cool J, um, was like an early forerunner in rap music, but then he transitions, he becomes a movie star, a TV star, and so he's like full on mogul by the time he's being painted here. And he had just read a book by Ron Chernow about John D. Rockefeller, and he said, "I want to be painted like John D. Rockefeller." And it just so happened that John Singer Sargent had painted a portrait of Rockefeller, who was, of course, at one point the richest man in the world. So Wiley examines that original portrait and he updates it for LL Cool J here. And there's a lot of wonderful similarities, like the white pants, the white suit here. Look at the way the fingers have been splayed and then sort of folded into a fist. But we also see that Wiley's repositioned the focus from the audience. We're looking up at our subject. So we've got that level of confidence here. I mean, John Singer Sargent's painting of Rockefeller sort of makes him look like a feeble old man. But I mean, LL Cool J looks like, ruler of the universe in a picture over here. Also, Wiley added like a little coat of arms over here with references to like a boombox and boxing gloves for a reference to an LL Cool J song. So, like I said, it's a great big work and it holds the wall. It captures your imagination when you see it. So sometimes Wiley is just of the moment. He's of his time, and other times it's almost as though he can anticipate what's coming ahead. So in 2016, I believe it was, he went to Richmond, Virginia, and he was very much struck by all of the Civil War monuments that were there, and he decided to create something in response to that. And that is a sculpture called Rumors of War. So it's an equestrian sculpture. We'll talk a little bit more about it in detail in just a moment. It's because if you've never been to Richmond, there's this main thoroughfare with all of these massive Confederate monuments with equestrian portraits of Confederate generals. And this one of General Robert E. Lee is actually 60 feet tall. That's like the size of a six-story building. It's almost hard to imagine just how grandiose these sculptures are. And of course, they are monuments to a failed army, right? A failed movement, a racist movement. So in present day America, we certainly know that 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 they are a symbol of slavery. They're a symbol of the Confederacy, and it I think doesn't make sense to a lot of Americans that they should still be there in this exalted form. And certainly that's what Kehinde Wiley was responding to when he decided to make his Confederate sculpture. So he based his off of one of those monuments for a Confederate general named Jeb Stuart. You can see that the horse is essentially identical, but instead of taking the likeness of that general, well, we'll get into this in terms of who his subject is here. But I just wanted to share just a little bit of backstory for his source material here, Jeb Stuart. When this sculpture was unveiled in Richmond, it was 1907. And as I was just doing a little bit of research on it online, I came across the image of like the community celebration that surrounded the unveiling of this sculpture. And it was said that somewhere between 80 to 200,000 people were there to celebrate the unveiling of this sculpture, and that something like 20,000 Civil War veterans actually camped there for about a week just because of this sculpture. And this is obviously decades and decades after the Civil War. And I looked at this picture and I just thought, what would it feel like to be a Black person in Richmond, Virginia on that day? And then my eye went right to this family right here in the foreground, a woman whose hand is behind her, and she's kind of leading a child, maybe a teenager behind her as they make their way through this crowd. If you zoom in, you can see that there's even the arm of a smaller child there, and they are just holding on to each other literally for dear life, making their way through this crowd. It's a reminder of what these Civil War monuments are really all about, right? So what did Wiley do? He decided to not use just one model for his rumors of war sculpture. Instead, he used facial recognition technology, and he used the faces of several, I think, 6 different Black men who had been killed by police. And he combined their faces into this one person. And he makes it a contemporary Black man sitting on the back of this horse triumphantly with, the dreadlocks up in this updo. He's wearing a hooded sweatshirt. He's wearing, I think, Nike sneakers. And so when this work was exhibited, it was first unveiled in New York City. You can see the crowd around it modern day. And now it's at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts in Richmond. And on their website, they say the sculpture offers an exquisite example of how to imagine and develop a more complete and inclusive American story. And, what a wild few years because in the space of time between this sculpture being unveiled, all of those Civil War monuments that he created this in response to are now gone. So this is the object of record now in Richmond, Virginia. Really interesting change of circumstances there. Okay, so now let's turn our attention to what is without a doubt Wiley's most famous work, which is his portrait of President Barack Obama. And I'm going to acknowledge the elephant in the room, just get it out of the way real quick. And that is the Simpsons meme that often comes up when people are talking about this picture. Barack Obama floating in front of these bushes, and it sort of reminds a lot of people of this Simpsons meme of Homer Simpson backing up into these bushes and disappearing awkwardly. It's just a little laugh. Let's get back to the art. Okay, so we are looking at the first African American president painted by the first African American artist to ever paint a presidential portrait. The Washington Post said, "It's not what you'd expect, and that's why it's great." This is a picture that is really so different from the traditions of painting presidential portraits. I mean, just a smattering of presidential portraits from the past. We can see that they're almost always wearing a suit, but it's almost always very muted tones, maybe a little bit of red. And they are a way to signify that this man held the office of the presidency, whether they're standing or seated. And Wiley decided he's going to approach this in a different way. But just a little bit more context. We're going to zoom out just a little bit further, and you can see just how different his work is compared to the entire history of presidential portrait here, save for JFK's portrait that was done by a woman artist, Elaine de Kooning. And then down here, I blew it up so that we could see Bill Clinton's portrait was done by the artist Chuck Close, who I really love, kind of pixelates his portraits that way. But we can see Wiley's portrait is a major departure from everything that came before it. Now, just a little bit more of additional context, you might have seen these other portraits that were done of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. There are at least 2 official portraits that are executed after a president, or that are executed in honor of a president, usually unveiled after they leave office. And this set here that we're looking at was for the White House. The Wiley portrait was commissioned for the National Portrait Gallery. So there's just that little distinction there. And I will say that that the Obamas had a choice in who would paint them. I think every president does, but they got portfolios from, I think, something like 20 different artists. They met with 3 or 4 of those artists personally, and then personally selected the artist that would choose them. And so what did Barack Obama get for his selection here? Well, he got a highly realistic portrait of himself. where he is sitting attentively, kind of leaning forward as though he's listening, maybe getting ready to speak. He looks somewhat relaxed, but also someone who that we should hold in high esteem. He's wearing a suit, but he's not wearing a tie. He's got an open collar. Apparently, he is wearing a Rolex here. Wiley was always used to coaching his models, telling them, to lift your chin, look up and off to the left. But that was a process that was apparently kind of frustrating to the president. And after a while, he said, you know what, just let me handle this. And essentially, he slid right into this position, and it ended up being the position that worked for them. He's sitting in this very shiny antique chair, and he seems to be hovering in midair in front of this field of bushes here. And that might even be a play on the word bushes, because certainly Barack Obama's White House came just after the Bush White House. But the flowers that were included in these bushes are meant to sort of track the journey, the life of President Obama, with references to important geographical places, Hawaii, Chicago, Kenya, Indonesia. So these flowers are have specific symbolic value for these various places. So typically, when a presidential portrait is unveiled, it's just like a little ho hum affair. It's not a big media event, but that's exactly what this one was, because of all the firsts involved with this particular painting. Now, Barack Obama spoke at this event, and he had some beautiful words to share about Wiley and his work. He said, he said, I was always struck whenever I saw Wiley's portraits by the degree to which they challenge our conventional views of power and privilege. The way he would take extraordinary care and precision and vision in recognizing the beauty and the grace and the dignity of people who were so often invisible in our lives. He put them on a grand stage, on a grand scale, and forces us to see them in ways they were so often not. Now, Obama also had some self-deprecating humor alongside this. He said that he had tried to sort of bargain with Wiley to give him less gray hair and smaller ears, but he said due to the artist's artistic integrity, he just wouldn't budge on that. And he also said, I have enough political problems as it is without you putting me on the back of a horse looking like Napoleon. So he was pretty happy when the painting was unveiled and he didn't look like Napoleon there. So apparently the artist and the president sort of bonded during this process. It took Wiley 2 years to paint this portrait, and he did it all himself from start to finish. But both of them had African fathers that were not really present in their lives. So they had a lot to share over that. And at this important unveiling event, Wiley got up and with tears in his eyes, he thanked his mother for all of her support and encouragement in his life, for essentially making sure that he always had paints and a paintbrush in his hand. Now, these paintings have sort of taken on a life of their own. And I should mention that Michelle Obama's portrait was done by an artist named Amy Sherrill. And so those works went on view at the National Portrait Gallery, and they tripled the attendance at the museum. People flocked to see these works. And then they went on a 5-city tour and drew hundreds of thousands of more people to see them. Chicago celebrated these portraits by projecting them up onto buildings. And then Kehinde Wiley's career is sort of made by this point. He's on the cover of Vanity Fair for the portraiture issue the following year. So, with that, with our last few moments left, I'm just going to share with you sort of where things stand with Kehinde Wiley's work, because things have kind of taken a turn in response to world events and to events in America in particular. So he has an exhibition that is currently touring. I believe it's still in Houston and it's heading to Miami if you want to book your tickets, but it's called An Archaeology of Silence. And these are works that still reference the history of art, but he's no longer referencing these grand manner portrait paintings that exalt the status of his subjects with these proud poses. Instead, he's looking at images of like uh, of saints and angels and Christ and other figures that are prone, that are on the floor, that are dead, that are dying, really dramatic images, and reinterpreting them with Black figures. So the image that just kind of took my breath away from this exhibition is this work here that's inspired by an ancient Greek sculpture, The Dying Gaul. Sorry, it's a Roman sculpture. Famous work where we see this nude figure who is essentially like a heroic enemy who is responding to his wounds here and twisting in pain. And we see that reinterpreted with a young Black man as our protagonist now. He's fully dressed. And importantly, he's wearing a hooded sweatshirt, which for me instantly reminds me of Trayvon Martin, the 17-year-old boy who was killed because he looked suspicious or dangerous because he was wearing a hoodie. And we can see Wiley has continued on with this notion of kind of interweaving this vegetal background. So here we have what almost looks like, um, this vegetal swag that's kind of wrapping around his leg here. But there's something about this shrouded figure in this classical pose responding to this wound potentially that is just so striking, so devastating. So for this work and for so many works from this period, Wiley was inspired by this painting by Hans Holbein the Younger. It's called The Body of the Dead Christ in the Tomb from 1520, where we can see an entombed Christ, and he's sort of I mean, it's a grotesque painting, really. Christ's body is emaciated, it's elongated, his eyes are open, his mouth is open. We can see all of his wounds, and it almost looks as though his skin is starting to kind of putrefy. And so Wiley takes that same pose, but he inserts a beautiful Black model who seems like they should be, for all the world, that they should be living. There's no signs of a wound here. There's just a detail of the hand. There's no signs of that same kind of exaggeration or elongation. It's just a young figure who now seems lifeless. And I will say that Wiley has kind of shifted the way he names his works. He used to just title them the same as the source material, and now he oftentimes includes the model's name there too. So just a few other works very quickly. You can see that he's working on a grand scale. We have somebody standing in the gallery here. The paintings are over 20 feet long. The sculptures are way over life size, and the bodies are in these dramatic poses where they oftentimes look like they're twisting in pain. These are paintings that were inspired by a famous sculpture from the early 1600s of the Virgin Martyr Saint Cecilia, who is lying on her side with her head kind of twisted in the opposite direction. Wiley uses these same beautiful, vivid colors and these decorative backgrounds to reinterpret that sculpture with both men and women models here. But the showstopper is another equestrian portrait. And in this case, it's the exact same horse that we saw with Rumors of War from before, but our rider is different, and our rider looks in peril. It's hard to say if he's been wounded or if he is deceased. I mean, we just can't know. But something has gone horribly wrong. Even though he's shirtless, and Wiley is so often interested in like those precise details of clothing and logos and that sort of thing. So the focus here is really on the beauty of this figure, the details of his hair. But we see that, like I said, he's in peril, he's in danger here, and may perhaps have been mortally wounded. So it's so interesting to think of these kind of bookends that exist already in this young artist's life, where he starts off with these equestrian portraits, these kind of imagined visions of what it would look like to insert Black men into this history of painting. And now he's really giving us a view of what Black reality might look like today, but still using the language of the history of art in order to do that. So there's this somber realism that exists in so many of those works. Now, we'll wrap things up really quickly and end on a positive note. We've got this another beautiful picture of the artist himself. He loves these great jackets, right? And I have just a few quotes from him because I think he has a beautiful way of describing what he does. He said, growing up as a kid in South Central Los Angeles and going to the museums in LA, there weren't too many people who looked like me in those museums. My purpose as a painter has been to project out into the world this urge, this itch, this desire to see something corrected. And in recent years, there's been a number of artists that have kind of been inspired by Wiley, sort of creating works on his coattails to a certain degree. This is a painting by Titus Kaphar, who uses canonical works and inserts or sometimes alters them or inserts Black figures in them. This is a photograph by a Kenyan artist who's also using Black models, but creating this really interesting interplay between the background and the costumes here. So I've got just one last great Wiley quote, so bear with me. He said, "It seems silly. You're taking this hairy stick and nudging things into being, but it's not. This is consequently who we as a society decide to celebrate. This is our humanity. This is our ability to say, I matter. I was here." And certainly his paintings let his audiences feel that way as well. So I will end there for now, and I welcome any questions or comments you might have. I'm seeing a lot already, so let me dive into the Q&A to begin. Somebody said they saw Kehinde Wiley and Barclay at the Yale Art Gallery recently, both life size. So I have a feeling that they made an impression because you do remember that. Stephen says, Jane, did you give another presentation on Andy Warhol in which you said Warhol did the same thing, meaning filming people for a few moments? Stephen, great memory. Yes, Warhol did the screen tests, right? So he would train the camera on somebody and then just walk away. All that he said to direct them was just look at the camera, don't really move. And he would play that back in slow motion. And so Wiley's doing something very similar with that Smile camera project that he did, where he's asking them to hold a smile over 3 minutes. Let's see. And I think maybe there's some discussion, about O.J. Simpson and his number. Sorry, I don't know about O.J. Simpson's jersey number, but that would have been an interesting element for those earlier pictures. Somebody asked, does he select or voice his approval of the frames used for his art? I think he's pretty involved with that decision making. We saw that with the black frame that he used at the Huntington, and then with his painting of Napoleon crossing the Alps. That was a custom frame as well that had the references to sperm on it too. But so I think he's fairly involved with the framing. And thank you for allowing me to go back to this work, because one fun fact about it is that this painting is now more Googled than the original David painting. So that's fun to know. Did he name his pieces with some twist on the name of the original piece? Oftentimes in the beginning of his career, he was just giving it the exact same name. Now he oftentimes uses the same name as the source material, but he includes the name of the model too. D asks, were the wallpaper-like backgrounds done with stencils? And I'm not sure. I think they could have been developed with stencils. I will say that he has a very extensive workshop at this point. So there's essentially another artist that handles that piece of the process at this point. And so I'm not sure if Wiley himself ever used stencils. It would seem to make good sense, wouldn't it? But these days he's like the artist that's going in and doing the hands and the faces. So when I say that he did all of the Obama portrait, that was 100% him, but he's got a big team that helps him these days. Emily says, I've seen photographs of important African rulers that have intricate pattern backdrops similar to those Wiley uses. I'm wondering if this is a Nigerian practice, thinking about his parentage. Do you know the source of his background inspiration? Emily, that's a really interesting connection. In my research, I didn't come across like a hard and fast, like this was his reasoning behind it, but I think we can sort of see a little bit of an evolution in it, in terms of how he arrived at it today. Sort of starting off with almost imagining like the hair here is being decorative, going back to some of that intricate patterning, that seems like it references the history of art, but it aren't necessarily direct references there. So it sort of seems as though he evolved in this direction, but was looking at like canonical works from art history. But that's not to say that maybe some of those African traditions weren't weren't informing this as well. Thank you for sharing that. That could very much be the case. Louise, thank you for your kind words. Dee says, was his mother alive when he painted President Obama? I believe she was. So I believe she heard him thank her. And somebody asked, why is he throwing a finger, especially Jesus? Great question. Believe it or not, I went down a rabbit hole on this one. I never thought I would be looking up the history of flipping the bird, but that is what we see going on here. And going back to the days of Christ, that was always considered a rude gesture. So I'm not exactly sure why Hans Holbein decided to paint him that way, but I think Wiley was just sticking to the original pose. Thanks for noticing that great detail. Steven says, oh yeah, the middle finger there is just the same as in the source material. And Grace says, can you, but I mean, it does have different associations for us now, right? Because this isn't Christ. It's not that he was crucified. Maybe Wiley was attracted to this because it is an opportunity to kind of flip the bird, to make that rude gesture, to think about why that young man would want to do that potentially. Um, Grace says, can you please email us a list of the artists and work titles? Well, I can tell you, Grace, that Kehinde Wiley has a magnificent website, and you can sort of go through his different exhibitions and you can find virtually all of the images that I showed you tonight are on his website. But if there's one work or a few in particular that you'd like, you can always reach me on my website, which is iamculturallycurious.com. And she asked, does Wiley make any distinguishing between Black and African American history or an overall Black diasporic point of view? Thank you so much for asking that, Grace. That was really the piece that I didn't have the time to touch on today. And that is such a big part in terms of his influence and his focus today. So he has established two major artist in residencies in Senegal and Dakar in Africa. He's like got a major African focus now. So many of his models, even in this most recent exhibition that I showed you, are models from Africa because I think he was kind of stuck there during COVID. So his focus really is on Black figures as opposed to just specifically African American. But he started off with the African American focus, and I think for American audiences, it helps to sort of focus on that, and because it's a point of reference for all of us. But thank you for asking about that. His focus is global, really, these days, and any one of us would be so lucky as to get one of those artist in residencies in Senegal or Dakar. So let's see. I'm gonna start going through the chat right now and seeing if I missed any questions there. Thanks for your patience as I scroll through this. Oh, Pat, I'm so glad. Pat asks, is there a presidential portrait of Trump? And that, I believe, is in the works. Like the whole financing for this and the timing for all of this, it's all fascinating to me. So I believe it's in the works. I don't know if they've announced who the artist that was selected was. Um, but I think they're waiting to sort of see the outcome of the next election before they move forward with this project, because it wouldn't be unveiled until after he was out of office. So it's all fascinating. Let's see here. Nancy asked, where did he get his models? Yes, off the street. He was casting people off the street, and he loved that sense of chance. You know, who am I going to meet? Who am I going to find? Is the background painted or silk screened? Those are painted backgrounds. And Pat asked, what is the bird-like thing on the top of the LL Cool J picture? I think that's like an invented coat of arms that we're looking at there. LL Cool J had a song. It's a real earworm, so I apologize for even saying the name of it. Now you're gonna have to look it up. It's called Mama's Gonna Knock You Out. And so this is the coat of arms where he's got the boxing gloves and the hat from the music video. That's like a boom box there. So that's all a reference to to like his career as a rapper. And Maria said, aren't they taken down now? I think you're probably referring to those Confederate sculptures. Yes, they are gone. um, and Pat says, let's see, and people are celebrating that. Grace says, I had the pleasure and privilege of seeing Obama's and Michelle's portraits for the first time at the National Portrait Gallery last fall. Um, Oh, so there is like a place, I think it's sort of a placeholder portrait of President Trump that's at the National Portrait Gallery right now, or at least in their collections. And I think it's a photograph as opposed to commissioning an artist, which I think is a process that is in the work. Is the background Obama's Hawaiian home state? There are flowers included in the greenery there that are supposed to be a reference to Hawaii. But the greenery isn't necessarily Hawaii itself. There's no simple, easy explanation as to why Wiley chose to do this field of green, other than the fact that nothing like this had really been done before. So, it's kind of, it's really visually interesting, isn't it? And Celia says, in your research of Wiley, and oh, Grace says, I miss the Obamas. And I have to say, looking at these portraits and like reading about the unveiling made me miss them too. In your research of Wiley, did you come across any information saying that his art students paint parts for his works? Yes. I think these are paid staff now. And he had, for some time, I'm not sure if he still does, he had a studio in China, he had a studio in Brooklyn. Like these are major undertakings. As far as I am aware, he's producing about 20 major works a year at this point. And they are selling for big bucks. So you can imagine with something as detailed and as large as these works, the different pieces of it, the backgrounds, the clothing, all of this is sort of um, delegated to artists that specialize in just that. But Wiley is still involved in the model casting, in the photography process. Now, instead of letting his models pick a pose, I think he usually poses them. And like I said, he's involved in like the finishing elements, the face and the hands here. Let's see here. He says, I was so happy and felt seen and much safer as an Asian American. Okay, yep. So we're getting into our Obama memories here now. Do you think the Obama saw the portraits before the unveiling? I have a feeling they had a good sense in terms of what those pictures look like. Um, Thank you, Pat, for your kind words. Deborah says, does the artist create the statues or are they his design? Deborah, great question. Because when I started seeing these equestrian portraits, I was like, how on earth is he creating these? I think he designs them and somebody else creates them. Creating a bronze cast sculpture is such an involved and detailed process, and it's a whole different skill set from creating a painted portrait. So once again, I think those are assistants that are running that show there. And I'm just seeing a lot of very, very kind words, and that means a lot to me. Thanks, everybody. Carol said, did Obama have to put into the background? Did Obama have input into the background of his portrait? You mentioned the symbolism of the flowers and possible pun on the bushes, but is there other significance to the natural world behind him? I don't think he necessarily had that input. I think that Kehinde Wiley was thinking, I have this opportunity and I'm going to do something really different than this entire history that came before me, and came before President Obama too. So my sense is that that was pretty much coming from the artist, but probably agreed to by the president first. Um, Deidre says, the first Kehinde Wiley portrait I saw was at the Philbrook Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was in awe. Now I travel to museums just to see how more grand they will be. They are a lot of fun to see in person, Deborah. I completely agree. His medium is oil paint. Frank, thanks for being here. Thanks for your kind words. And I'm glad that there's some new Kehinde Wiley fans here now. I have to say this is my last scheduled presentation of this program, at least for now. And I hate to give up on it because I love his work so much. And so thanks for coming and letting me share it with you. His website, just Google his name and it will come right up. Um, I, let's see here. Where did the Confederate sculptures go? Good question, Alice. I would assume they are in some sort of Virginia history museum, probably in storage. I think the museum world is trying to really figure out how to present objects like that with a little bit of better context and um, sort of reinterpret them for contemporary audiences. Oh, Sarah, I like what you're saying here. She says, I love that Obama's portraits, that his background is alive. The other traditional portraits are dark, barren settings, very much so. Grace is wowed that he's producing 20 of these a year. Alice asks, where did he learn sculpture? I think he just learned to bring on a very talented team. Um, oh, Deborah, thanks for your kind words. I think I got through all of these. Thank you, everybody, for your very kind words. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you've had fun tonight learning a little bit more about Kehinde Wiley.
Thank you so much, Jane, again for this awesome presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I do want to just let folks know before you head out that next month's program for Art on Thursdays will be on a Wednesday. So keep that in mind. So it's going to be Wednesday, March 27th at 7 p.m. And we're going to be going through Women's History Month, Fierce Females, Women in Art. So please join
Part
us for
two.
that.
Yes,
Part
part two.
two. Yes. So please join us for that next month. Thanks again, Jane. And I hope everyone has a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Bye, Gianna.
Bye.